July 1999. I have nothing new to report, so we're going to get right to the books. And the first book that I read in July of 1999 was Choice of Evil by Andrew Vax. This is one of the Burke books, and in this book, Burke's girlfriend, Crystal Beth, is murdered at a gay pride rally, and of course, he vows vengeance, but someone else kills the killer first. And this killer, the second killer, is killing gay bashers, essentially. That's what the description on Amazon says. And some people hire Burke to find this second killer and help them escape justice, essentially. So they're a good vigilante, but it might be somebody from Burke's past. It can get confusing trying to describe it, but it's essentially pretty straightforward. It's Andrew Vax, it's Burke, it's good stuff. Next up, Bootleg by Damon Wayans. It's a comedy book, nonfiction. A lot of Damon Wayans stand-up stuff. I've heard some problematic things, I think, about Damon Wayans, but back in the day, pretty funny. So, if you like reading comedy stuff, comedy books, nonfiction, stand-up stuff, it's funny. Excuse me. Third, we have Patriarch's Hope by David Feintuck, the fifth book in the Seafort saga. Holy crap. Sixth book? Either way, Patriarch Hope, our hero, Nicholas Seafort, is basically in charge of everything. He's the General Secretary of the UN, which I don't think stands for United Nations at this point, but it may. But he's been sort of obsessed with protecting the Earth from aliens invading, and so he's been putting everything into building spaceships at the cost of the Earth itself falling apart. And now he finally has to deal with that. But it looks like there's an invasion coming. I love these books. It's been a while. Well, it's been quite a while since I've read them. But just very well written. What started out as military-ish sci-fi, because of the whole Navy thing in the first book, has built beyond that. It's just good, interesting science fiction. It's an interesting world where the Catholic Church is in charge, essentially. Good stuff. Excuse me. I followed that up. I'm all over the place in July of 1999. I followed that up with Lost Souls by Poppy Z. Bright. It's from Dell. I believe it was an Abyss book. I believe it was from Dell. This is a vampire novel. You've got some human characters. They're all sort of lost. And then you've got some vampire characters, also sort of lost. And there's three main human characters. The vampires come, I believe, and take two of them. And so the last one, I think it's Ghost, is trying to find and save his friends. It's peak Poppy Z. Bright, peak Del Abyss. It's good stuff. It's a book I wish I still had so that I could reread it. Then, I do have another. I have this one. Trace and 47 Miles of Rope by Warren Murphy. Part of the Trace series. Trace is an insurance investigator. And in this one, one of the clients of the insurance company that he works for is killed in Vegas. And there's a wild cast of characters. And Trace has to figure out what's going on. And there's like $1 million in diamonds or something missing. Trace has to figure out what's going on. Should the insurance company be paying out? Of course, that's always the ultimate question for the insurance company. I really dig the Trace books. They're quick, fun reads. Trace is a nice, sarcastic character. Reminds me a bit of Fletch. Good series. And then I must turn the page. Then we have Wrath of the Lion by Jack Higgins. Excuse me. And this is about a French submarine that has been taken over by a terrorist group that wants France to maintain control of Algiers. Something. But of course, the government's going to get involved. You got your secret agents and stuff trying to stop this terrorist group on this submarine. Jack Higgins, pretty much always a good read. Not necessarily one of my favorites. This is probably the only time I've read this one. I don't recall if there's any historical fact in this book, but it's a fun thriller. Jack Higgins writes fun thrillers, and they don't get bogged down like Robert Ludlum or Jean Le Carré, however you say his name. Wrath of the Lion, Jack Higgins. Then we have Body Bags by Christopher Golden. This was the first in a series, let me check, Jenna Blake series. Jenna Blake's a freshman in college, and her mother wants her to be a doctor. She can't stand the sight of blood. Her father wouldn't mind her going into criminology, I believe is how it goes. So he has sort of a solution to meld the two together. She can become a medical examiner. But one of her professors dies, and she's involved in the autopsy, and then some other people die, and there's a mystery. Is there a killer disease? There's a human killer. She's got to figure out what's going on. Keep more people from dying. I think it's a young adult series. Not that matters. It's Christopher Golden. And it's Body Bags. All right. Now, the last three books are all World of Darkness based. So we have Dark Destiny 3, Children of Dracula, edited by Edward E. Kramer. And despite being a World of Darkness book, not all of these stories are really tied into Vampire the Masquerade and the World of Darkness White Wolf stuff. It is essentially what it says. It's all vampire stories. And they range from historical. I'm trying to remember now if this is the book. I've read a book that had a short story about Cain, of Cain and Abel fame, being the first vampire. That was the curse that God put on him. So I'm wondering if it was in this book. I'm not sure. If anybody knows, let me know. But there's sort of a prequel story to Dracula that deals with the Confederate States in the USA. There's a story with Santa Claus. So just a wide range of vampire stories, a lot focused on Dracula. I think this was pretty good, pretty interesting. A lot of good authors. A nice anthology. And then the penultimate book that I read in July of 1999 there's a lot of title here. The Grail's Covenant, Book 1, To Sift Through Bitter Ashes by David Niall Wilson. And this is the first book in a trilogy that takes place in the world of Vampire the Dark Ages. And our main character's name is Montrevant. He's a vampire of the Lasombra clan, I believe, and he's looking for the Holy Grail. And so there's the Knights Templar and some ancient Egyptian evil and an evil vampire who's a Nosferatu, perhaps. That's one of the clans. Um, but basically, of course, the main focus is Montrevant trying to find the Grail. And I followed that up, the last book I read in July of 1999, with The Grail Covenant, Book 2, To Speak in Lifeless Tongues by David Niall Wilson. And this continues the story. It takes place centuries later, quite a bit later, but Montrevant is still searching for the Grail. Bad guys still after trying to stop him and get the Grail. The Knights Templar, I think, are falling apart at this point. But it's Vampire of the Dark Ages from White Wolf. It's a pretty interesting story. I typically like their more modern stories. But when you have a decent author and an interesting story, the Dark Ages stuff isn't too bad. I'm going to give you a heads up right now. The first book that I read in August of 1999 is the last book of this trilogy. But there you go. That's what I read in July of 1999. I think that's a pretty eclectic mix. Science fiction, horror, mystery, comedy, all sorts of stuff. So for a question for this video, how about what setting or settings would you be interested in seeing Dracula placed in? Does that sentence make sense? What types of stories, I suppose, would interest you if Dracula was thrown in there? Dracula. I can't remember if it was Dracula versus Santa Claus, or is he teaming up? Is Santa Claus fighting Dracula? Dracula fighting the clan. Can't go wrong there. As always, did not think ahead, but I'm always interested. I don't know. Excuse me. How about, I don't know if I could say Dracula or if I just have to go generic vampire in like feudal Japan. That's sort of my go-to setting for this type of question. We've seen Dracula in the Old West. One of the earliest vampire movies I remember watching as a kid was Billy the Kid versus Dracula, or Dracula versus Billy the Kid, whichever way the title goes. But that would be fun, and I've relatively recently read a story that had Dracula in the Old West. But yeah, that's Dracula in the Old West, always fun. Dracula or a Dracula-like vampire in feudal Japan. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't just say Dracula, but a Dracula-like vampire, because Dracula has a specific time frame. I want to open that up to any time. What do you think? Is this a ridiculous question? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on my channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. All the usual YouTube stuff. If you'd care to follow me on other social media, my Twitter is @Ronan5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, and fuzzy animals, is EricSmith5757. And if you're on Blue Sky, I am @ELSmith. That's all I have for you this week. So until next week, read more books.